What if the reason you've always felt a little different wasn't because something was wrong with you, but because something about you was operating at a level most people never learn to recognize? What if being gifted doesn't always look like perfect grades, flashy talent, or obvious genius? What if, for a lot of people, giftedness feels more like confusion, intensity, loneliness, and a mind that just never seems to move at an ordinary speed? If that feels strangely personal, stay with me. Because 90% of people think gifted means smart, fast learner, high IQ, good at school, good with facts, good with numbers. But real giftedness is often much deeper, much quieter, and much harder to explain. It's not just about how much you know, it's about how you process reality, how deeply you feel, how quickly you notice patterns, how hard it is to switch your mind off. How often you feel like you're living 3 layers beneath the surface of a conversation while everyone else seems comfortable staying on top. And that matters in real life more than most people realize. Because when giftedness goes unrecognized, people don't say, maybe you process the world differently. They say, you're too much. You think too much. You're too sensitive. You're intense. You ask weird questions. Why can't you just relax? So a gifted person can spend years misreading themselves. Not as deep, but as difficult. Not as perceptive, but as overcomplicated. Not as intense in a beautiful way, but as somehow out of sync with the world around them. And that is where this gets painful. Because some gifted people grow up admired, but many grow up misunderstood. So let's talk about the signs. Not the obvious ones. The hidden ones. The ones that make people feel seen. The first sign is that you've always felt older and younger than other people at the same time. Older, because your mind has always gone deep. You may have been the child asking unsettling questions too early, thinking about life, death, fairness, meaning, people's motives, emotional tension in the house. Maybe adults called you mature. Maybe they were impressed by how much you understood. But younger, because emotionally, there may have been parts of you that felt raw, overwhelmed, or strangely unprotected. Gifted people often develop unevenly. Their mind races ahead, but their nervous system still has to catch up. So you may have looked advanced on the outside while privately feeling confused by how intense everything was on the inside. That split can follow you into adulthood. You seem wise in some ways, but strangely fragile in others. And that doesn't mean you're broken. It means your depth arrived early, and not everyone knew how to hold it. The second sign is that you notice what other people miss, and it's exhausting. You walk into a room and immediately feel the emotional atmosphere. You catch small shifts in tone, hidden tension, fake enthusiasm, subtle discomfort, the thing no one is saying out loud. In conversation, you don't just hear words. You hear what sits underneath them. You notice contradictions. You notice patterns. You notice when someone's smile doesn't match their eyes. And people often think this is just sensitivity, but giftedness often comes with heightened perception. Not in some mystical way, in a very real psychological way. Your brain processes layers quickly. It connects details fast. It picks up on patterns before others consciously register them. The problem is, constant perception can become constant stimulation. You may feel drained after social situations other people call normal. Not because you hate people, but because your mind is taking in far more than it appears to from the outside. When others leave the room, they leave the room. When you leave the room, part of your brain is still processing it. That's the hidden cost of seeing deeply. You don't just observe life. Life enters you more intensely. The third sign is that small talk feels strangely painful, not because you think you're better than people. That's one of the biggest misconceptions. It's not arrogance, it's hunger. Gifted people often crave meaning, honesty, insight, emotional substance. So when a conversation stays on the surface too long, it can feel empty in a way that is hard to explain. You can do small talk, you know how, but it often feels like wearing shoes that don't fit. You want to talk about what people fear, what they regret, what they love, what changed them, what they pretend not to care about, what they can't admit. You want the real conversation, not the rehearsed version. And this can make social life confusing, because sometimes you feel deeply lonely in rooms full of people. Not because no one is there, but because almost no one is meeting you where your mind naturally lives. Gifted people are often starving for resonance, not attention. That's an important difference. The fourth sign is that your emotions are more intense than you let people see. A lot of gifted people are deeply emotional, even when they appear composed. They may feel beauty more intensely, sadness more sharply, injustice more personally, rejection more deeply, wonder more fully. They don't just react to life, they absorb it. And because the world often rewards emotional control over emotional truth, many gifted people learn to hide this. They become articulate instead of vulnerable, insightful instead of exposed, calm-looking instead of honest about how much they feel. But underneath that composure, there is often a huge emotional life. A single comment can stay with you for days. A song can break you open. A meaningful conversation can live in your chest for weeks. A betrayal doesn't just hurt, it rearranges your inner world. This is why some gifted people feel overwhelmed by themselves. Their mind is powerful, but their emotional depth is just as strong. And when both are active at the same time, life can feel incredibly vivid and incredibly heavy. The fifth sign is that you've spent years feeling misunderstood, even when people liked you. This one cuts deep, because giftedness does not automatically create belonging. In fact, it often complicates it. You may be admired for your intelligence, your talent, your insights, your creativity, your originality. But admiration is not the same as being understood. People may enjoy what you can do without really understanding how you are. They may praise your mind but miss your loneliness. They may call you impressive while quietly finding you hard to relate to. They may like having you around, but not truly see the inner world you live in every day. And over time, that creates a strange ache. You stop asking, "Do people like me?" and start asking something much more painful. Does anyone actually get me? For many gifted people, the answer has been not often enough. The sixth sign is that your curiosity has never felt normal. Gifted people are often not just interested in things, they become consumed by them. They fall into ideas. They obsess over patterns. They go down rabbit holes nobody asked them to enter. When something captures their mind, it can become almost magnetic. They don't want the simple answer, they want the hidden structure behind the answer. This can show up as reading deeply, asking unusual questions, researching things intensely, making unexpected connections, or constantly jumping from one complex interest to another. It can make you look scattered to people who don't understand it. But often, it's not scattered at all. It's your mind trying to fully explore what fascinates it. Giftedness is often less about knowing more and more about one thing, and more about feeling internally compelled to understand reality in a richer way than most people need to. You are not just curious about facts. You are curious about meaning. The seventh sign is that you struggle with perfectionism, but not because you want to impress people. It goes deeper than that. A lot of gifted people can see the gap between what is and what could be with painful clarity. They imagine the better version immediately, the better sentence, the better design, the better decision, the better future, the better conversation, the better self. And that vision can become both a gift and a burden. Because when your mind naturally sees possibilities so vividly, reality can feel disappointing. Your work may never feel finished enough. Your efforts may never match the standard in your head. Even when others say it's great, part of you may only see what it failed to become. So gifted people often don't procrastinate because they're lazy. They procrastinate because their inner standard is so high that starting feels emotionally expensive. If I can already see how imperfect this will be, why begin? If I know what's possible, how do I tolerate producing something ordinary? And this can lead to one of the saddest patterns of giftedness. People with extraordinary ability living far below their potential because their own mind makes action feel heavier than it should. The eighth sign is that you have a complicated relationship with authority, rules, and systems. Not because you're rebellious for the sake of it, but because you question structure naturally. You notice inefficiency, hypocrisy, shallow thinking, lazy logic, and systems that ask for obedience instead of understanding. You don't accept because that's how it's done, as a satisfying answer. And that can create friction early in life. In school, you may have done well but felt bored, frustrated, or mentally unchallenged. At work, you may struggle in environments where politics matter more than competence, or routine matters more than insight. In relationships, you may resist emotional games because you can see them too clearly to pretend they make sense. Gifted people often need reasons, not just rules. They need depth, not just direction. And when they don't get that, they may look difficult, detached, or uncooperative. But often, what's really happening is simpler. Their mind cannot fully respect what it cannot honestly understand. The ninth sign is that you often feel like your mind never truly rests. Even when nothing dramatic is happening, there is motion, analysis, reflection, imagination, connection making, replaying, anticipating, questioning. Your inner world stays active long after the day is over. This is one of the least glamorous parts of giftedness. People assume intelligence must feel empowering all the time, but many gifted people are tired. Tired of thinking in layers, tired of noticing so much, tired of seeing patterns that others ignore, tired of carrying a mind that doesn't always know how to be quiet. Rest can feel difficult, not because you don't want peace, but because your mind keeps searching for more to process. A conversation from earlier, a future decision, a hidden meaning, a new idea, an old memory, a question that won't let go. And sometimes the greatest struggle of a gifted person is not how to think better. It's how to stop thinking long enough to feel alive inside the present moment. That is why some gifted people look calm while feeling internally crowded. And the 10th sign, maybe the one that explains all the others, is that you've always sensed you were different, but couldn't explain why without sounding arrogant or strange. This is the hidden loneliness of giftedness. You may have felt out of place in groups, but not superior. Different in conversations, but not disconnected from humanity. More intense, more aware, more mentally restless, but unsure how to say that without sounding self-important. So instead, you downplay yourself. You make yourself easier to digest. You hide the depth. You simplify the questions in your mind. You laugh things off. You perform normal. You act like the intensity isn't there. But deep down, you know. You know your mind moves differently. You know your inner life is unusually active. You know you've spent years translating yourself into forms that other people can tolerate. And the painful part is that this often leaves gifted people feeling split. The outer self becomes manageable. The inner self remains vast, busy, intense, hungry, and largely unseen. But here's what 90% of people don't know. Giftedness is not just a gift. It is a difference in wiring that changes how you experience almost everything. Learning, relationships, boredom, beauty, pain, purpose, loneliness, injustice, possibility. It can make life richer, but also harder. It can make you capable, but also isolated. It can make you insightful, but also emotionally exhausted. And if nobody ever names it correctly, you may build an identity around being too much, instead of understanding that you were simply processing more. That is why this matters. Because once a person realizes they may be gifted in a real psychological sense, something inside them often relaxes. Not in a self-congratulatory way, in a grieving way, in a clarifying way. They start reinterpreting their life. Maybe I wasn't too intense. Maybe I was undermet. Maybe I wasn't overly sensitive. Maybe I was picking up on more than people realized. Maybe I wasn't difficult. Maybe I needed depth where others only offered surface. Maybe I wasn't failing to fit in. Maybe I was trying to shrink something that was never meant to be small. That shift matters, because self-understanding changes the emotional tone of your entire life. And if you do recognize yourself in these signs, the goal is not to turn giftedness into an ego badge. It's not to romanticize being different. It's not to separate yourself from others and quietly decide you're beyond them. The goal is to understand your wiring so you can stop fighting yourself, to choose environments that challenge you instead of flatten you, to build relationships where depth is welcome, to stop pathologizing your intensity, to learn how to rest a mind that naturally goes far, to realize that being gifted is not about being better than people. It's about needing a life that fits the size and speed of your inner world. Because the truth is, many gifted people are not suffering from being too smart. They are suffering from being unseen in the exact places where they needed recognition most. So if this video felt a little too accurate, maybe that's not an accident. Maybe the thing you've been calling overthinking, sensitivity, intensity, weirdness, or emotional complexity has always been a form of depth that was never properly named. And maybe the real tragedy is not that gifted people are rare. It's that so many of them grow up believing their deepest traits are flaws. So here's the thought I want to leave in your mind. A gifted person is not simply someone who can do more. Often, it's someone who feels more, sees more, questions more, and struggles more to find a world that meets them at the right level. And once you understand that, everything changes. Because then you stop asking, why have I always felt different? And you start asking the better question. What kind of life would finally make sense for someone like me? That question can change your future. Because maybe your intensity was never the problem. Maybe it was the first clue.